Victoria Chen stood at the edge of the grand ballroom in the Plaza Hotel, her fingers gripping her leather portfolio tightly. The annual Manhattan Business Excellence Conference buzzed with energy as hundreds of the city's most powerful business leaders mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. At 28, she was one of the youngest marketing directors ever to attend this prestigious event, representing Meridian Industries in their quest to secure the biggest client of the year. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her navy blue suit conveyed both professionalism and confidence. Victoria had worked tirelessly to earn her place in this room, climbing from a small marketing assistant role to directing campaigns worth millions of dollars. Tonight, everything she had worked for could change with a single presentation. "You look nervous," said Samantha Kim, her best friend and colleague, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. "That's not like you at all." Victoria accepted the drink gratefully. "I'm not nervous about presenting. I'm nervous about him." She nodded toward the center of the room where a tall, dark-haired man in an expensive charcoal suit commanded attention from a circle of executives. David Rodriguez, CEO of Phoenix Corporation, was known throughout the industry for his sharp business mind and his company's aggressive expansion tactics. "David Rodriguez," Samantha whispered. "I heard Phoenix Corporation is bidding for the same Henderson account we want. Their presentation is right after yours." Victoria studied David from across the room. Even from a distance, she could see the confidence in his posture, the way other business people leaned in when he spoke. Phoenix Corporation had been on a winning streak for the past 3 years, acquiring smaller companies and landing major contracts that established them as serious competition in the marketing world. "He doesn't know what he's up against," Victoria said, straightening her shoulders. "We have the better strategy." The presentation begins. The conference's main presentation hall was packed with industry leaders, potential clients, and media representatives. Victoria sat in the designated presenter area, reviewing her notes one final time. Her presentation for Henderson Global was innovative, focusing on authentic storytelling and community engagement rather than traditional advertising approaches. When her name was called, Victoria walked to the podium with steady steps. The spotlight was warm on her face as she looked out at the sea of faces. In the 3rd row, she spotted David Rodriguez, his steel-gray eyes focused intently on her. Something about his direct gaze made her pulse quicken, but she channeled that energy into her presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice clear and confident, "today I want to talk about the future of marketing. Not the future of selling products, but the future of building genuine connections between brands and communities. For the next 20 minutes, Victoria presented her vision for Henderson Global's new campaign. She spoke about grassroots marketing, community partnerships, and sustainable business practices that would position Henderson as more than just a corporation, but as a neighbor and ally to the communities they served. The audience was engaged, nodding along with her points, asking thoughtful questions during the Q&A portion. Victoria felt the presentation had gone perfectly until David Rodriguez raised his hand. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the large room, "your community-focused approach sounds idealistic, but how do you measure the actual return on investment for Henderson Global? How do you quantify the value of being a good neighbor when shareholders are looking for concrete profit margins?" Victoria felt the challenge in his question immediately. This wasn't just a professional inquiry. It was a direct attack on the foundation of her entire proposal. She met his gaze directly. "Mr. Rodriguez, with respect, I think you're asking the wrong question. The real question isn't how we measure short-term profits from community engagement. The question is how we build sustainable, long-term brand loyalty that creates customers for life rather than just one-time buyers." She clicked to her next slide, revealing detailed analytics and projections. "My research shows that companies investing in authentic community relationships see 40% higher customer retention rates and 25% increased referral business over 5 years, while your traditional approach might generate immediate revenue. Sustainable community partnerships create lasting value that extends far beyond quarterly reports." David leaned forward in his seat, clearly intrigued despite himself. "And if Henderson Global needs immediate results to satisfy their board of directors, community engagement is a long-term strategy. But business decisions are often made based on short-term pressures. Then they'll get both, Victoria replied smoothly. My proposal includes immediate impact initiatives alongside long-term community building. We start with high-visibility community partnerships that generate immediate, positive media coverage and social media engagement, which translates to measurable increases in brand awareness and sales within the first quarter. She could see approval in several audience members' faces. But David's expression remained skeptical. He was testing her, pushing her to defend her ideas against practical business realities. The challenge escalates after the presentation. Victoria mingled with potential clients and industry contacts, but she couldn't shake the feeling that David Rodriguez was watching her. When she finally approached the bar for a glass of water, she found him already there, waiting. Impressive presentation, he said, though his tone suggested he meant something more complex than simple praise. Though I think you're underestimating the challenges of implementing community-focused marketing at Henderson's scale. Victoria turned to face him fully. Up close, David was even more imposing than she'd expected. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, and intense gray eyes that seemed to see everything. His expensive suit fit perfectly. There was an energy about him that suggested he was always thinking several steps ahead. And I think you're underestimating the intelligence of modern consumers, Victoria replied. People today can spot authentic engagement versus corporate manipulation from a mile away. Phoenix Corporation's traditional advertising approaches might work for companies selling widgets. But Henderson Global is a lifestyle brand. They need emotional connection, not just market penetration. David's eyebrows rose slightly. Emotional connection doesn't pay for research and development, Ms. Chen. Market penetration and profit margins do. Henderson Global needs measurable results, not feel-good community projects. Mr. Rodriguez, Victoria said, setting down her water glass with perhaps more force than necessary. I've spent the last 3 years turning around marketing. Campaigns for companies that were failing precisely because they prioritized short-term profits over sustainable growth. Meridian Industries has seen 200% growth in client retention since implementing community-focused strategies. Meridian Industries is not Phoenix Corporation, David replied, his voice becoming slightly cooler. We've built our reputation on delivering concrete results for our clients. Henderson Global will get better ROI from our proven methodologies than from experimental community outreach programs. Victoria felt her competitive instincts flare. She'd spent years fighting for respect in boardrooms full of men who thought her ideas were too soft, too idealistic, too feminine. David Rodriguez was just another executive who believed that bigger budgets and louder advertising automatically meant better results. Experimental? She repeated. Mr. Rodriguez, community engagement isn't experimental. It's the foundation of every successful business relationship. Maybe Phoenix Corporation has gotten comfortable with outdated approaches because you haven't had real competition until now. David's smile was sharp. Competition? Ms. Chen. Phoenix Corporation has been leading this industry, while Meridian Industries was still figuring out how to land major clients. We don't consider anyone real competition until they've proven they can compete at our level. Then, you're about to learn something new, Victoria said, meeting his challenging gaze directly. Because Meridian Industries isn't just competing at your level. We're setting a new standard that Phoenix Corporation will be scrambling to match. The battle lines are drawn. Samantha peered at Victoria's side, clearly sensing the tension between the two executives. Victoria, the Henderson Global representatives want to discuss timeline details with you? Of course, Victoria said, never breaking eye contact with David. Mr. Rodriguez, I look forward to seeing Phoenix Corporation's presentation. I'm sure it will be very educational. I'm certain it will be, David replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Especially for anyone who thinks business success comes from good intentions rather than strategic execution. As Victoria walked away with Samantha, she could feel David's eyes following her. The conversation had gone far beyond professional disagreement into something that felt distinctly personal. What was that about? Samantha whispered as they approached the Henderson Global team. That, Victoria said quietly, was war being declared. For the rest of the evening, Victoria was aware of David Rodriguez's presence in the room. When she spoke with potential clients, she noticed him watching from across the room. When she networked with other marketing professionals, she caught him observing her interactions. It was as if they were circling each other, each trying to assess the other's strengths and weaknesses. The stakes rise. David's presentation followed Victoria's, and she had to admit it was impressive. Phoenix Corporation's approach was polished, data-driven, and professionally executed. David spoke with the kind of confidence that came from years of success, outlining traditional marketing strategies that had proven effective for similar companies. His presentation focused on market analysis, demographic targeting, and advertising campaigns designed to maximize reach and frequency. Everything was supported by charts, graphs, and case studies from Phoenix Corporation's previous successes. It was exactly the kind of safe, predictable approach that many executives preferred. But Victoria noticed something interesting as David presented. Several times his eyes found hers in the audience, as if he were presenting directly to her, rather than to the Henderson Global representatives. It was as though their earlier conversation had shifted something in his approach, making this less about winning a client and more about proving a point. During the Q&A session, Victoria asked her own challenging question. Mr. Rodriguez, your data shows impressive short-term results. But how does Phoenix Corporation address the growing consumer demand for authentic brand relationships? Your campaigns seem designed to sell to people rather than connect with them. David's response was smooth and professional. But Victoria caught a flash of something in his expression. Irritation, maybe? Or recognition that she'd identified a weakness in his approach. Ms. Chen, he replied, Phoenix Corporation focuses on delivering measurable results for our clients. We leave the emotional appeals to companies that can't demonstrate concrete value through traditional metrics. It was a direct jab at her presentation, and Victoria felt her competitive fire burn brighter. David Rodriguez might be successful and confident, but he was also arrogant enough to dismiss innovative approaches simply because they challenged his established methods. The gauntlet thrown as the conference wound down, Victoria found herself alone in the elevator, heading back to her hotel room. She was reviewing the business cards she'd collected when the elevator stopped at the 15th floor, and David Rodriguez stepped in. Convenient, he said, pressing the button for the 20th floor. I was hoping for a chance to continue our conversation. Were you? Victoria asked, not looking up from her cards. I thought Phoenix Corporation didn't consider Meridian Industries worth their attention. I may have been hasty in that assessment, David admitted. Your presentation was more sophisticated than I expected. Victoria finally looked at him. More sophisticated than you expected from a small company? Or more sophisticated than you expected from a woman? David's jaw tightened slightly. More sophisticated than I expected from someone who's never handled a client the size of Henderson Global. And yet here we are, both finalists for the same contract, Victoria pointed out. Which suggests that Henderson Global sees something in Meridian Industries that perhaps Phoenix Corporation overlooked. The elevator reached Victoria's floor and she stepped toward the doors. As they opened, David spoke again. Ms. Chen, this industry is built on results, not good intentions. Henderson Global will choose the company that can deliver proven success, not experimental community programs. Victoria turned back to face him, her hand holding the elevator door open. Mr. Rodriguez, this industry is changing whether Phoenix Corporation adapts or not. Henderson Global will choose the company that understands the future of marketing, not the company that's stuck in the past. Then may the best company win, David said. Oh, we will, Victoria replied with a confident smile. That's exactly what I'm counting on. As the elevator doors closed between them, Victoria felt the thrill of a challenge accepted. David Rodriguez might be successful, experienced, and undeniably attractive, but he just underestimated the wrong woman. The competition for Henderson Global had become personal, and Victoria Chen had never lost a fight she truly cared about winning. The war begins back in her hotel room. Victoria called her team at Meridian Industries to debrief on the day's events. As she described her encounters with David Rodriguez, she realized that something significant had shifted. This wasn't just about winning a client anymore. It was about proving that her vision for the future of marketing could compete with and ultimately defeat the traditional approaches that had dominated the industry for too long. David Rodriguez had made the mistake of challenging not just her professional abilities, but her fundamental beliefs about business and community. He dismissed her ideas as idealistic and her company as inexperienced. But Victoria had spent her entire career proving wrong men who underestimated her intelligence, her drive, and her ability to succeed in their world. As she fell asleep that night, Victoria's mind was already racing with strategies for the next phase of their competition. Henderson Global would make their decision within 2 weeks. But she had a feeling this rivalry with David Rodriguez was just beginning. She had no idea how right she was, or how completely her life was about to change. 2 days after the Manhattan conference, Victoria sat in her corner office at Meridian Industries, reviewing market research reports when her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Chen? Henderson Global just called. They want to schedule follow-up presentations with both Meridian and Phoenix Corporation next week." Victoria's pulse quickened. Henderson Global requesting additional presentations meant they were seriously considering both proposals. It also meant she would be seeing David Rodriguez again sooner than expected. Did they specify what they want to see in the follow-up? Victoria asked, already reaching for her calendar. They want detailed implementation timelines and budget breakdowns. The presentations are scheduled for the same day, back to back. Phoenix Corporation presents at 2 in the afternoon, and we present at 4. Victoria nodded, her mind already racing with strategies. Having the later time slot could work to her advantage, allowing her to address any concerns that might arise during David's presentation. But it also meant Phoenix Corporation would have the opportunity to set expectations and frame the conversation before she even sawmed. Entered the room. Unexpected encounters that evening. Victoria decided to work late at the office, preparing for the Henderson Global follow-up. She was deep in financial projections when the building's security guard knocked on her door. "Ms. Chen, there's someone here to see you. Says he's from Phoenix Corporation." Victoria's heart skipped, though she kept her expression neutral. "Please send him up." Minutes later, David Rodriguez appeared in her doorway, looking less polished than he had at the conference. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and there was something almost vulnerable about his appearance that caught Victoria off guard. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, not getting up from her desk. "This is unexpected." "I was in the building meeting with a potential client on the 15th floor, David said, stepping into her office uninvited. "I saw Meridian Industries listed in the directory and thought I'd stop by." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "To scope out the competition?" "To apologize," David said, and Victoria's surprise must have shown on her face because he continued quickly. "My comments at the conference about your experience level were unprofessional. Whatever our business differences, we've clearly built something impressive here." Victoria looked around her office with fresh eyes, trying to see it as David might. The space was modern but warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Her walls displayed framed campaign materials from successful Meridian projects, and her bookshelves held industry publications alongside personal photos and awards. "Thank you," she said carefully. "Though I have to ask what prompted this sudden change of heart." David moved closer to her desk, and Victoria caught a hint of his cologne mixed with the scent of coffee and something uniquely him. "I spent the last 2 days researching Meridian Industries more thoroughly. Your client retention rates, your campaign success stories, your team's credentials. I realized I made assumptions based on company size rather than company quality. And that bothers you?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious about his motivations. "It bothers me that I let preconceptions cloud my professional judgment," David admitted. "Phoenix Corporation didn't get where it is by underestimating the competition. I made a tactical error." Victoria studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or strategy. But David's expression seemed genuinely contrite, and there was something in his eyes that suggested this apology mattered to him personally, not just professionally. "Apology accepted," she said finally. "Though it doesn't change the fact that we're still competing for the same client." David's smile was rueful. "No, it doesn't. But at least now we can compete on level ground." "The research phase over the next week?" Victoria threw herself into preparation for the Henderson Global follow-up presentation. She worked 8-hour days, refining timelines, adjusting budgets, and developing contingency plans for every possible objection. Henderson's team might raise, but despite her intense focus on work, she found her thoughts drifting to David Rodriguez more often than she cared to admit. His unexpected visit to her office had revealed a side of him she hadn't anticipated. The confident, almost arrogant CEO from the conference had shown genuine humility and professional respect that intrigued her. Samantha noticed her distraction during their weekly strategy meeting. "You've been different since the conference," she observed. "More focused, but also more distracted. What's going on?" Victoria looked up from the presentation slides she'd been adjusting for the third time that morning. David Rodriguez came by the office earlier this week, the Phoenix Corporation CEO. "Here." "Why?" "To apologize for underestimating Meridian Industries," Victoria said, still not entirely sure she believed it herself. Samantha's eyebrows shot up. "That's either very professional of him or very strategic. Which do you think it was?" "I'm not sure," Victoria admitted. "Maybe both." The Henderson Global offices, the following Monday. Victoria arrived at Henderson Global's Manhattan headquarters 30 minutes early. Wanting to familiarize herself with the presentation space and ensure all her technology was working properly. The building was impressive, a gleaming tower that spoke to Henderson Global's success and ambition. As she set up her laptop in the conference room, Victoria heard familiar voices in the hallway. Through the glass walls, she could see David Rodriguez, with 2 other Phoenix Corporation executives, clearly preparing for their own presentation. David looked up and caught her eye through the glass. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the hallway. Then David said something to his colleagues and walked toward the conference room where Victoria was setting up. "Ms. Chen," he said, entering the room with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere he went. "Ready for this afternoon?" "Always," Victoria replied, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened when he smiled. "I've been looking forward to seeing your implementation timeline," David said, moving closer to where she was arranging her materials. "Your community engagement approach requires significant coordination. I'm curious how you plan to manage the logistics." Victoria turned to face him fully. "Mr. Rodriguez, are you fishing for information about my presentation strategy?" "Would you tell me if I was?" David asked, his tone playful rather than confrontational. "Absolutely not," Victoria said. But she was fighting back a smile. "Though I appreciate the directness of the approach," David laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire face. "Fair enough. Good luck this afternoon, Ms. Chen. May the best proposal win." "Oh, it will," Victoria said with mock confidence. "I'm counting on it." Phoenix Corporation's presentation, Victoria watched. David's presentation from the observation area that Henderson Global had set up for waiting presenters. Through a one-way glass wall, she could see into the main conference room where David was addressing Henderson's executive team. He was impressive, she had to admit. David commanded the room with easy authority, walking confidently between his presentation slides and the conference table. His proposal was comprehensive, well-researched, and professionally polished. Phoenix Corporation's track record spoke for itself, and David presented their capabilities with the kind of confidence that came from repeated success. But Victoria noticed something interesting as she watched. David's presentation style was more collaborative than she'd expected. Instead of simply delivering information, he asked questions, invited input, and adapted his responses based on the room's energy. It was the approach of someone who understood that winning clients required more than just impressive credentials. When Henderson's marketing director asked about community engagement strategies, Victoria saw David pause slightly before answering. His response was professional and adequate, but it lacked the passion and detailed understanding that Victoria knew she could bring to the same. Question Victoria's moment an hour later. Victoria stood in the same conference room, facing the same executives who had just heard Phoenix Corporation's proposal. She could feel the weight of expectation in the room and the knowledge that her presentation needed to not just be good, but notably better than what had come before. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria began. This afternoon, I want to show you not just what Meridian Industries can do for Henderson Global, but how we can help you build something that's never been done before in your industry. For the next 45 minutes, Victoria presented her vision with the passion and expertise she'd spent years developing. She didn't just explain her community engagement strategy. She painted a picture of Henderson Global's future as a company that customers didn't just buy from, but actively supported and recommended to others. She addressed budget concerns with detailed financial projections that showed not just the costs of community engagement, but the measurable returns in customer loyalty, word-of-mouth marketing, and brand differentiation. She presented implementation timelines that were ambitious but realistic, with clear milestones and success metrics at every stage. Most importantly, Victoria spoke about Henderson Global's values and mission in a way that connected their business goals to their potential impact on the communities they served. She made the case that successful marketing wasn't just about selling products, but about building relationships that created lasting value for everyone involved. The unexpected question during the Q&A session. Henderson's CEO asked a question that caught Victoria off guard. Ms. Chen, we've now heard presentations from both Meridian Industries and Phoenix Corporation. Both proposals have significant merit. If you had to identify the strongest element of Phoenix Corporation's approach, what would it be? Victoria felt the room's attention sharpen. This was clearly a test of her professionalism and her ability to assess competition objectively. She could feel David's presence even though he wasn't in the room, as if his earlier presentation was still influencing the conversation. Phoenix Corporation's greatest strength is their proven track record with large-scale implementations, Victoria said honestly. They have the infrastructure and experience to execute complex campaigns without the learning curve that sometimes comes with innovative approaches. Mr. Rodriguez presented a strategy that Henderson Global could implement immediately. With confidence in the results, and why should we choose Meridian Industries over that proven track record? Henderson's marketing director asked. Victoria had been preparing for this question all week, but hearing it asked directly still made her heart race. Because Henderson Global isn't looking for immediate results from proven strategies. You're looking for sustainable, competitive advantage in a changing marketplace. Phoenix Corporation can give you what's worked in the past. Meridian Industries can give you what will work in the future. The waiting game after the presentations concluded. Both companies entered the waiting period while Henderson Global made their decision. Victoria returned to her office energized but exhausted, knowing she'd given everything she had to the presentation. 2 days later, she was surprised to receive a call from David Rodriguez. Ms. Chen, this is David Rodriguez. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, Mr. Rodriguez, Victoria said, settling back in her office chair. I have to admit, I'm curious about what prompted this call. I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in having dinner. Not as competitors, just as two professionals who might enjoy each other's company. Victoria felt her pulse quicken. The invitation was unexpected and definitely complicated given their current business rivalry. David, we're still competing for the same client. Don't you think dinner might be a conflict of interest? Probably, David admitted. But I find myself wanting to know more about the woman who's given Phoenix Corporation the most interesting competition we've faced in years. Victoria found herself smiling despite the complications. Just dinner? No business talk? No fishing for information about future strategy? Just dinner, David confirmed. And the chance to discover whether Victoria Chen is as intriguing off the battlefield as she is on it. The first date. They met at a small Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village. Far from the corporate environments where they'd previously encountered each other, David arrived first and stood when Victoria entered, and she noticed how different he looked in casual clothes. The expensive suits had been replaced by dark jeans and a navy sweater that somehow made him seem more approachable. You look beautiful, David said as she approached their table, and Victoria felt a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with business competition. Thank you, she said, settling into her chair across from him. This is strange, isn't it? Having dinner with the enemy? Are we enemies? David asked, pouring wine from the bottle he'd already ordered. I was thinking of us more as worthy adversaries. Victoria accepted the wine gratefully. Is there a difference? Enemies want to destroy each other, David said thoughtfully. Adversaries want to beat each other, but they can respect the competition. And which are we? Victoria asked. David's smile was warm and slightly mysterious. I'm hoping we're about to find out. Getting to know each other as the evening progressed, Victoria discovered aspects of David Rodriguez that she never would have suspected from their professional encounters. Away from corporate environments, he was funny, thoughtful, and surprisingly self-aware about his own privileged background. Phoenix Corporation was my father's company, David explained over their main course. I grew up knowing I'd eventually run it, which is both a tremendous opportunity and an enormous pressure. Sometimes I wonder if I'm building on his legacy or just trying not to ruin it. Victoria was surprised by his honesty. That must be incredibly difficult. Having success handed to you, but also having to prove you deserve it. Exactly, David said, looking relieved that she understood. People assume everything came easily because of my family connections, but the truth is, I work twice as hard as everyone else because I'm terrified of being seen as someone who only succeeded because of his last name. Victoria found herself relating to his struggle more than she'd expected. I understand that pressure, though from the opposite direction. I've had to work twice as hard to prove I belong in rooms full of executives who assume I'm only there because of diversity initiatives or quotas. How do you handle it? David asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. The same way you do, I imagine. By being better prepared, working harder, and winning often enough that eventually people have to acknowledge your capabilities, regardless of their assumptions. Shared vulnerabilities as the evening continued. Victoria and David discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both had sacrificed personal relationships for professional success. Both struggled with work-life balance. And both carried the weight of proving themselves in environments where they felt they had to constantly justify their presence. I haven't had a serious relationship in over 2 years, Victoria admitted over dessert. It's hard to date when you work 18-hour days, and most men are either intimidated by your career or threatened by your success. I understand that completely, David said, though my challenge is the opposite. Women either want to date the CEO of Phoenix Corporation, or they're so suspicious of my wealth that they can't see past it to who I actually am. Victoria studied his face in the candlelight. And who are you actually? David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Someone who loves what he does, but sometimes feels trapped by it. Someone who's successful, but not sure if he's happy. Someone who's been looking for something real in a world full of people who want something from him. The honesty in his voice made Victoria's chest tighten. She'd expected dinner with David Rodriguez to be professionally interesting, possibly strategically valuable. She hadn't expected it to be emotionally revealing. The complication, as they prepared to leave the restaurant, David walked Victoria to the corner where she planned to catch a taxi home. The evening had been wonderful, but it had also created a complication neither of them had anticipated. Victoria, David said as they waited for a taxi, I need to be honest about something. Henderson Global is going to make their decision this week, and after that, one of us is going to win and the other is going to lose. I know, Victoria said quietly. I've been thinking about that all evening, regardless of what happens with Henderson Global. I'd like to see you again. Not as competitors, just as David and Victoria. But I also understand if that's too complicated given our professional situation. Victoria looked at him standing, there in the glow of the streetlights, and felt a pull of attraction that was definitely more than professional interest. David Rodriguez was intelligent, successful, and undeniably attractive, but more than that. He'd shown her vulnerability and authenticity that made him genuinely appealing. It is complicated, she said finally. But maybe complicated isn't always bad. David's smile was brilliant. Does that mean you'll consider having dinner with me again, after Henderson Global makes their decision? Ask me again after we know who won, Victoria said as a taxi pulled up to the curb. Then we'll see how we feel about complicated. The decision approaches the next morning. Victoria returned to work with her mind buzzing from the previous evening's conversation. Spending time with David outside their competitive environment had revealed a chemistry and connection she hadn't expected. But it had also made their professional rivalry more personal and therefore more challenging. Samantha noticed immediately that something had changed. "You look different today. Happier, but also more conflicted." "What happened?" "I had dinner with David Rodriguez last night," Victoria said, settling at her desk with her morning coffee. "You what?" Samantha's voice carried across the office. "Victoria, please tell me you didn't reveal anything about our Henderson Global strategy?" "Of course not," Victoria said quickly. "It wasn't about business. It was personal." "Personal how?" Samantha asked, closing Victoria's office door for privacy. "Personal, like I'm attracted to him, he's attracted to me. And we spent 3 hours discovering we have more in common than either of us expected," Victoria admitted. Samantha stared at her. "Victoria, he's the competition. You can't fall for the competition." "I know," Victoria said miserably. "But I think it might be too late to worry about that." The phone call that afternoon. Victoria's assistant buzzed her office with the call she'd been both anticipating and dreading. Henderson Global was ready to announce their decision. "Miss Chen," came the voice of Henderson's CEO, "thank you for your patience during our decision process. Both presentations were exceptional. This was one of the most difficult decisions we've had to make." Victoria gripped her phone tighter, her heart pounding as she waited for the verdict that would determine not just her professional future, but potentially her personal one as well. After extensive deliberation, Henderson Global has decided to move forward with Meridian Industries. Your community engagement approach and implementation strategy convinced us that you're the right partner for our brand's future. Victoria felt a rush of triumph mixed with something that might have been guilt. She'd won, which meant David had lost. The professional victory was everything she'd worked for. But it also meant their growing personal connection would now be colored by business defeat. "Thank you," Victoria managed to say. "Henderson Global won't regret this decision." After the call ended, Victoria sat in her office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline, feeling simultaneously elated and conflicted. She'd achieved the biggest professional win of her career, but she couldn't stop thinking about David Rodriguez and how he would handle losing to the woman he'd taken to dinner just 2 nights before. Victoria stared at her phone for several minutes after Henderson Global's call ended, the weight of her victory settling over her like a complex mix of triumph and uncertainty. She had won the biggest contract of her career, but the celebration felt incomplete knowing that
David
Rodriguez was likely receiving his own phone call with very different news. Samantha burst into her office moments later, having clearly been waiting nearby for the decision. "Well, what did they say?" "We won," Victoria said, though her voice lacked the excitement Samantha had obviously expected. "We won," Samantha shouted, throwing her arms around Victoria. "This is incredible. This changes everything for Meridian Industries. We'll be able to expand, hire more staff, take on bigger clients." "Victoria, this is the breakthrough we've been working toward for years." Victoria hugged her friend back, trying to match her enthusiasm, but her thoughts kept drifting to David. How was he handling the loss? Was he disappointed, angry, or simply moving on to the next opportunity with the professional detachment she'd seen him display at the conference? "There's going to be a celebration tonight," Samantha continued, already planning. "The whole team, plus some of our other clients who've been following this pitch. Everyone's been waiting to hear the results." Victoria nodded absently. "That sounds perfect. You handle the arrangements, and I'll meet everyone there." After Samantha left to organize the celebration, Victoria tried to focus on the immediate tasks that came with winning such a major contract. There were implementation timelines to finalize, team assignments to make, and client meetings to schedule. But despite the professional demands competing for her attention, she couldn't stop thinking about her dinner with David and the connection they'd discovered. David's response that evening, as Victoria was getting ready for the celebration dinner, her phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and she hesitated before answering, unsure what to expect from this conversation. "Congratulations," David said as soon as she picked up. His voice warmed despite what must have been a disappointing afternoon for him. "Henderson Global made the right choice. Victoria felt a wave of relief at his gracious response. David, I'm sorry you didn't get the contract. I know how much Phoenix Corporation wanted it. We did want it, David admitted. But honestly, after hearing your presentation and spending time with you the other night, I understand why Henderson Global chose Meridian Industries. Your approach is exactly what they need, even if it took me too long to recognize that. The sincerity in his voice made Victoria's chest tighten with emotion. She hadn't expected. That's very generous of you to say, especially considering the circumstances. Victoria, can I ask you something? David's voice became more serious. Are you free this weekend? I know we're no longer competing for the same client, and I'd like to take you to dinner again. Somewhere we can talk without the weight of business rivalry hanging over us. Victoria felt her pulse quicken. With the Henderson Global decision settled, professional complications that had made their attraction problematic were gone. They were no longer competitors, which meant they could explore whatever was developing between them without conflict of interest concerns. I'd like that, Victoria said, surprised by how much she meant it. Though I have to warn you, my team is celebrating tonight, and I might be exhausted from all the excitement. David's laugh was warm and genuine. Then we'll make it a relaxing dinner. I know a place with excellent food and complete privacy where you can decompress. From your victory, the celebration, the Meridian Industries celebration dinner, was everything Victoria had hoped it would be. Her entire team was there, along with several current clients and industry contacts who had followed their pursuit of the Henderson Global contract. The restaurant buzzed with excitement and congratulations. As Victoria's colleagues toasted her, success and discussed the opportunities this win would create for the company, but even surrounded by celebration and support. Victoria found her thoughts drifting to David. She wondered what he was doing tonight, how Phoenix Corporation was handling the loss, and whether he was as disappointed as she would have been in his position. Richard Torres, Meridian Industries' senior partner, stood to make a toast halfway through the evening. To Victoria Chen, whose vision, dedication, brilliant strategy just landed us the biggest client in our company's history. This win proves that innovation and integrity can compete with any approach in our industry, as everyone raised their glasses. Victoria felt the full impact of what she'd accomplished. Henderson Global wasn't just a client. It was validation of everything she'd worked to build at Meridian Industries. Her community-focused marketing approach had been chosen over Phoenix Corporation's traditional methods, proving that her vision for the future of marketing was more than just idealistic theory. But even as she accepted congratulations and discussed implementation plans, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from this victory. The professional triumph was complete, but the personal satisfaction felt incomplete without being able to share it with David. The weekend, date Saturday evening. David picked Victoria up at her apartment, arriving with a bouquet of flowers and a smile that made her forget all about the complicated history of their relationship. He looked relaxed in dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt that brought out his eyes. And Victoria noticed that away from corporate environments, he seemed more comfortable in his own skin. You look beautiful, David, said as Victoria answered her door. She'd chosen a simple black dress and minimal jewelry. Wanting to look elegant without seeming like she was trying too hard, Thank you, Victoria said, accepting the flowers. These are lovely. Let me put them in water before we leave. As she arranged the flowers in a vase, David looked around her apartment with obvious interest. Victoria saw her space through his eyes, cozy but sophisticated, with warm colors, comfortable furniture, and personal touches that reflected her personality rather than her professional image. This suits you, David said, studying the framed photographs on her bookshelves. It's warm and unpretentious, but you can see the intelligence and attention to detail in every choice. Victoria felt a flutter of pleasure at his observation. I wanted a space that felt like home, not like an extension of my office. Somewhere I could relax and be myself, rather than the marketing director version of myself. And what's the difference between the two? David asked as they headed toward his car. Victoria considered the question as David held the car door open for her. The marketing director is always on, always strategic, always thinking 3 steps ahead. The real me just wants to cook dinner, read books, and have conversations that don't involve quarterly projections or client retention rates. The restaurant David had chosen, a small French restaurant in the West Village that felt intimate and romantic without being ostentatious. Their table was tucked into a quiet corner with soft lighting and enough privacy for genuine conversation. Victoria noticed that David had clearly put thought into selecting a place where they could talk without interruption or observation. "This is perfect," Victoria said as they settled into their seats. "How did you find this place?" "My sister Charlotte recommended it," David said, pouring wine from the bottle he'd pre-ordered. "She said it was where she brings dates when she wants to have real conversations, instead of just impressing them." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "And which category do I fall into?" David's smile was warm and slightly self-conscious. "Definitely the real conversation category. I'm more interested in getting to know Victoria Chen than in impressing the director of Meridian Industries." As the evening progressed, Victoria discovered even more depth to David's personality. Away from the pressures of competition and corporate expectations, he was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly introspective about his own life and career choices. "Can I confess something?" David said over their main course. "When Phoenix Corporation lost the Henderson Global contract, part of me was relieved." Victoria looked up from her meal, surprised. "Relieved? Why?" "Because winning that contract would have meant proving that traditional approaches are still the best approaches. It would have validated the safe, conservative strategies that Phoenix Corporation has always used." David paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "But your win proves that innovation and creativity can compete with established methods. It gives me permission to consider new approaches for Phoenix Corporation, instead of just following the same formulas my father used." Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "So my victory is inspiring you to change your company's strategy?" "Your victory is inspiring me to question assumptions I've held for years," David said seriously. "About business, about success, about what it means to build something meaningful rather than just something profitable." The personal revelation. Dessert arrived. Their conversation shifted from professional topics to more personal ones. Victoria found herself telling David about her childhood in a small town outside Sacramento, her parents' sacrifices to help her attend college, and her journey from an entry-level marketing assistant to running her own department. "I've spent my entire career trying to prove I belong in rooms full of executives who assumed I was there by accident," Victoria said. "The Henderson Global win feels like the first time. I don't have to justify my presence or my ideas." David reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Victoria, you've never been in any room by accident. Your success comes from talent, hard work, a vision that's clearly ahead of where the industry is heading." The sincerity in his voice made Victoria's eyes prick with unexpected emotion. She'd received plenty of professional compliments over the years, but David's words felt different. He saw not just her accomplishments, but the struggle and determination behind them. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know, Victoria," David said, his voice becoming more serious. "I need to tell you something. The reason I asked you out tonight wasn't just because we're no longer competing for the same client." Victoria felt her heart begin to race. "What was the reason?" "Because I'm falling in love with you," David said simply. "And I wanted you to know that before we go any further." The confession. Victoria stared at David across the candlelit table, his words hanging in the air between them like a challenge and a promise. She'd sensed their growing connection, felt the attraction building since their first dinner. But hearing him say it directly made everything suddenly real and immediate. "David," she said softly, "that's a pretty significant confession for a second date." "I know," David said, not releasing her hand. "And I know it complicates things. But Victoria, I've spent months watching you work, competing with you, getting to know you. And I can't pretend that what I feel is just professional respect or casual attraction." Victoria looked into his eyes and saw vulnerability, honesty, and something that looked very much like love. The intensity of his expression made her breath catch, and she realized that somewhere between their rivalry and their growing friendship, she'd fallen for him too, David, I need you to know that I never expected this, Victoria said. When we met at the conference, you were just the competition. Even when we had dinner the first time, I thought we were just two professionals who happened to enjoy each other's company. And now? David asked quietly. Victoria took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything between them. Now, I think I'm falling in love with you too. And that terrifies me because I've never mixed business with personal feelings before. David's smile was brilliant and relieved. So we're both terrified and both falling in love. That seems like a good foundation for whatever comes next. The industry awards ceremony 3 months later. Victoria stood in the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, surrounded by 500 of the marketing industry's most influential leaders at the annual Excellence in Marketing Awards ceremony. She wore a stunning emerald green gown that David had helped her select, and she felt more confident and elegant than she ever had at a professional event. Meridian Industries had been nominated for Campaign of the Year for their Henderson Global work, and Victoria had been nominated for Marketing Director of the Year. The nominations alone were significant recognition. But Victoria's real excitement came from sharing the evening with David, who was also being honored for Phoenix Corporation's innovative new community engagement initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, the ceremony's host announced from the podium. The winner of this year's Campaign of the Year award goes to Meridian Industries for their revolutionary Henderson Global Community Partnership program. Victoria felt a rush of triumph as the audience erupted in applause. Samantha squeezed her arm excitedly as Victoria stood to make her way to the stage, but not before David caught her hand and brought it to his lips for a quick, encouraging kiss. On stage, accepting the Crystal Award that represented the pinnacle of recognition in her industry, Victoria looked out at the audience and found David's face in the crowd. His expression was one of pure pride and love, and Victoria felt her heart swell with happiness that went far beyond professional achievement. The public declaration as Victoria began her acceptance speech. She spoke about the importance of innovation in marketing, the value of community engagement, and the satisfaction of building campaigns that created lasting positive impact. But as she neared the end of her prepared remarks, she found herself looking directly at David and feeling overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them both to this moment. Finally, Victoria said, departing from her planned speech, I want to acknowledge someone who has challenged me, inspired me, and supported me throughout this project. David Rodriguez of Phoenix Corporation began as my competitor, but became my colleague, my collaborator, and most importantly, the person who taught me that success is meaningless unless you have someone to share it with. The audience stirred with interest, clearly sensing that something unexpected was happening. Victoria could see recognition dawning on several faces as industry colleagues began to realize she was talking about a romantic relationship. David, Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. You've shown me that competition doesn't have to mean conflict, that rivals can become partners, and that sometimes the best business strategy is simply being honest about what matters most. Victoria paused, looking directly at David, who was now standing in the audience with an expression of amazement and anticipation. What matters most to me is you, Victoria said, her voice strong and clear. I love you, David Rodriguez. And I wanted everyone in this room to know that the woman who won Campaign of the Year is absolutely crazy about the man who taught her that winning isn't worth anything unless you're building something meaningful with someone you love. Ballroom erupted in gasps, applause, and the excited buzz of 500 people witnessing something completely unexpected. Victoria could see shock, delight, and approval on various faces throughout the audience, but the only expression that mattered was David's. David's response. David's response. David moved through the crowd toward the stage with the same confidence he'd shown in every business meeting Victoria had ever seen him attend, but his expression was one of pure joy and determination. When he reached the stage steps, he paused only long enough to look up at Victoria with a smile that transformed his entire face. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the podium. Victoria stepped aside, her heart pounding as David took the microphone. The ballroom quieted in anticipation, waiting to see how he would respond to such a public declaration of love. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 3 months ago, Victoria Chen was my biggest competitor. She challenged every assumption I had about marketing, about business, and about what it means to build something lasting and meaningful. Victoria watched from beside the podium as David addressed the audience with the same command and authority. He brought 2 corporate presentations, but with an emotional openness she'd never seen him display. Publicly, Victoria didn't just win the Henderson Global account by being better prepared or more strategic than Phoenix Corporation, David continued. She won because her vision of marketing as relationship building rather than just profit generation represents the future of our industry. David turned to look directly at Victoria, and she saw love, admiration, and complete vulnerability in his expression. But more than that, Victoria Chen won my heart by being exactly who she is. Brilliant, passionate, principled, and brave enough to risk everything for what she believes in. David's voice became stronger, more certain. "Victoria, I love you too. I love your integrity, your creativity, your refusal to accept that business success requires compromising your values." The audience was completely silent now, captivated by the unprecedented display of personal emotion at a professional industry event. "Victoria Chen," David said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, "will you marry me and teach me to build a life as innovative and meaningful as the campaigns you create?" The ultimate happy ending. Victoria stared at David kneeling on the stage of the Waldorf Astoria ballroom, holding a ring that sparkled under the stage lights, surrounded by 500 of their industry colleagues, and felt her heart expand with a happiness she'd never imagined possible. "David Rodriguez," she said, taking the microphone back and speaking to both him and the captivated audience. "6 months ago, you were the most arrogant, challenging, impossible competitor I'd ever encountered. You questioned my strategies, challenged my assumptions, and made me work harder than I'd ever worked to prove my ideas had value." Victoria looked down at David, still kneeling, still waiting for her answer, and felt tears of joy prick her eyes. "You also showed me that the best partnerships are built on mutual respect, honest communication, and the willingness to grow and change together. You've made me a better marketing director, a better business leader, and a better person." Victoria took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would be heard and remembered by everyone in their professional community. "Yes, David Rodriguez, I will marry you. I will build Phoenix Corporation's community engagement programs with you. I will challenge you to be innovative and ethical in every business decision. And I will love you for the rest of my life." The ballroom exploded in applause, cheers, and the kind of enthusiastic celebration usually reserved for major business victories. As David slipped the ring onto Victoria's finger and stood to kiss her, Victoria realized that she'd found something more valuable than any professional achievement, a partnership that would challenge and support her for decades to come. The new beginning. 1 year later, Victoria stood in her new office at Rodriguez Chen Marketing Solutions, the company she and David had founded after their marriage. The space was larger than her old Meridian Industries office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park and enough room for the expanded team they'd built by combining the best talent from both their previous companies. On her desk sat both her Campaign of the Year award and a framed photograph from their wedding day, where they'd exchanged vows, surrounded by family, friends, and many of the same industry colleagues who had witnessed their engagement at the awards ceremony. Samantha knocked on her office door, now serving as Chief Operations Officer for their joint venture. "Victoria, the Henderson Global team is here for their quarterly review. David's running a few minutes late from his Phoenix Corporation transition meeting." Victoria smiled, checking her watch. David was in the final stages of selling Phoenix Corporation to his management team, allowing him to focus entirely on their new company and the innovative approaches they were developing together. "Tell Henderson Global will start in 5 minutes," Victoria said. And Samantha, Remind me again how we got so lucky that our biggest professional rivalry turned into the best business partnership either of us could have imagined. Samantha grinned. I think it had something to do with both of you being too stubborn to back down from a challenge. Even when the challenge was falling in love, as David appeared in her doorway, slightly breathless from rushing between meetings, but smiling at the sight of her, Victoria realized that Samantha was exactly right. The competition that had brought them together had also taught them that the best victories were the ones you could share with someone who understood the work, the dedication, and the dreams that made success meaningful. Ready to show Henderson Global what Rodriguez Chen Marketing Solutions can accomplish when we're working together instead of against each other? David asked, straightening his tie and moving to kiss her cheek. Always, Victoria said, taking his hand as they headed toward the conference room where their biggest client was waiting. Though I should warn you, I'm still planning to challenge every assumption you make and push you to be more innovative than you think possible. David's laugh filled the hallway as they walked toward their next professional victory together. Victoria Rodriguez Chen, I wouldn't have it any other way. As they entered the conference room hand in hand, ready to present their latest campaign strategies to the client that had brought them together, Victoria reflected on the unexpected journey that had led her from viewing David as her greatest professional threat to recognizing him as her perfect personal and business partner. Sometimes, she thought, the best love stories began with the fiercest competitions. And sometimes, the greatest professional victories were the ones that led to the most meaningful personal happiness. Victoria Chen had found both. She couldn't wait to see what challenges and triumphs she and David would face together in the years ahead.